Well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the third annual State of Black Learning Conference. Please help me welcome William Jennerett III, Morehouse class of 2024.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is William Jennerett III, and I'm an incoming freshman biology major at Morehouse College. I would first like to say I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during this public health crisis. I wish this conference could happen in person, but the health of the community takes precedent. With all that said, I am beyond excited to kick off the State of Black Learning Conference 2020. This year has been turbulent, to say the least, but having a State of Black Learning Conference at this point in time is critical. With a global pandemic and social justice still plaguing our country, it is imperative that we continue to learn the best skills and practices to better educate our Black youth. Unfortunately, a few weeks ago, I found out that I would not be spending my first semester of college at home. Due to COVID-19, Morehouse and the rest of the AUC shut down their campus for the fall semester. Over the next few months, this will be the reality for most youth and young adults. So how do we navigate these online spaces as learners and educators? How do we ensure that the results for Black children improve and not regress? On the flip side of that coin, post-George Floyd America will be different. Schools across the country are revisiting how they teach race within the classroom. How do we continue the momentum to ensure that the education system continues to produce better results for Black children? Over the next few weeks, we will attempt to find these answers. Last year, I was a keynote speaker at the State of Black Learning Conference, and it truly changed my life. I left the conference with confidence, and I was extremely motivated and ready to improve the education system. I hope that after these sessions, you leave with the same feelings that I did. We will be hearing from a multitude of experts in their respective fields, and we will leave with the ability to take the information back to our own respective communities. So let's get into it. To start off the State of Black Learning 2020, we have the Culture Resurrection with Liz Dozier, CEO and founder of Chicago and Beyond, and the former principal of Chicago's historic Fenger High School. Help me to introduce her.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much, William. Good afternoon, everyone. I am absolutely and beyond thrilled to be here with all of you today. Thank you to Chase, to Kari, for everyone who made my being here happen. It is, again, an absolute honor and a privilege. And thank you to all of you for having me in your home, in your office, whoever space and place you are occupying in the world today. I am glad to be with you, and I'm excited that we get to spend time together. Similar to William, I wish it could have been with Plan A and that I'd be connecting with you in person and seeing all of your faces. You know, there's something so powerful about the energy of the collective. But alas, in 2020, I feel like we've had to do away with a lot of Plan A's and make dramatic changes in our lives. And it's all happened so incredibly fast, as you know. So my hope today is that as a collective that we're able to learn some stuff, maybe unlearn a few things, question some assumptions. Hopefully we're gonna have a few laughs. I always like to laugh. And hopefully you just might come away with reconsidering how you walk into your classrooms or schools or wherever you sit in the educational system, whether that's in a virtual way or in a hybrid way, but that you reconsider how you walk in. So not too much to promise over the next 90 minutes, but I think between Mike, Sundiata, and myself, we got this. I was a teacher and a principal. We're all in education here, and this is just what we do. So I want to start just by sharing a quote with you today to set the stage for our time together. It's one of my favorite quotes, and you probably know it too, you're in education. It's by James Baldwin. And it says this: "The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. It's incumbent upon each of us, I think especially in our role as educators, to carefully and intentionally do just that, to examine. For I believe as we go, so goes the world. So let's talk. Today, I want to explore the deliberate marginalization of Black children in our educational system in this country and what we do from our respective spaces and places in that to restore their culture within learning. From my vantage point, I really believe the biggest and most insidious attack in America on Black people is actually not the attack on Black bodies. It's the attack on Black minds, and namely Black children's minds. And I believe, yes, obviously as human beings, we have to protect Black bodies, like full stop, no question. But simultaneously, we have to ensure we are applying that same vigilance and also protecting Black children's mind, for therein really lies all of our future. The good news is that the people who hold that power over this are in this virtual room with us today. And I'm gonna illustrate for you that power and how fast it can truly transform. So like William mentioned, I lead an organization now called Chicago Beyond, which essentially backs the fight for equity in the city of Chicago unapologetically for Black children. And we get resources out all over the city of Chicago. I started that organization about 4 years ago after I left Finger High School. And thus far, we've gotten almost $40 million out to our children across the city of Chicago to help create a more equitable city. But before that, before I started Chicago Beyond, I spent my time at Finger High School. And I'm gonna describe Finger High School to you for those of you who might not be familiar with it or might not be from Chicago. So when I got there, Finger High School had roughly 15,000 young Black students. Beautiful. Our students aspired to attend college. They had hopes and dreams for various careers. I mean, they aspired to great things. But when I got there, Finger was all too typical of what people think of city schools, where there were too many kids failing, and not just like academically failing, but ultimately failing in their life outcomes. And so I want to show you a clip. And the reason why I want to show you this clip is I want to give you a sense of what it was like. It's from CNN. It's from a documentary series called Chicagoland. And in that docuseries, it included a profile of key figures in the city of Chicago. And it included a profile of our school and the work we were trying to do at Finger High School. So hopefully technology will work for us. And I want you to go ahead and take a look, and I'll see you on the other side of it.
Finger High School Principal Liz Dozier is on a mission to give her kids a shot at a better future.
There's a larger ongoing gang conflict within the community, and like the school, we sit like in the middle of this. Gentlemen, not gonna happen, not today, not today. Keep it moving. Get out of the street, I'm not gonna say it again. Get out of the street. He's headed southbound on 112th and Emeralds. Principal down, and I broke my shoe. Can you sit still for me on 112th and Emerald? I broke my shoes.
An important part of Principal Dozier's job is to keep tabs on gang conflicts and make sure her students are safe at school. By the time a kid gets to high school, his gang affiliation can become his identity, and even a lunchroom fight can turn into a gang war.
Who was the other girl? I need you to go down there and get that.
Principal Dozier and her team have transformed the culture at Finger High.
Lady, it's too loud. It's too loud. There are two kids arguing. Let's figure out what the issue is, because if we don't get to the root of it, it will continue to bubble up until it will explode.
In 2009, Finger was identified as a failing school that needed to be saved. Principal Dozier was hired and given broad authority over an entirely new team. She also received a 4-year federal grant to help turn the school around.
The climate in the school was just absolutely abysmal, like massive gang fights in the hallways, 300 arrests that first year. We had to have literally 2 districts worth of police in the building for us to be able to change classes one day. It was a scary time in terms of like, what's happened to our children? There was a shooting a couple blocks from the school. but we got a couple calls saying a lot of our kids are up there. They're my kids. I feel like, worried, panicked, like, who is it? I've lost kids before. Something happened to one of them and it was because like something that we did or didn't do or something, I would just die. The work is not between like the hours of 8 and 3:30. To me, it extends beyond that. Schools become like these dropout factories. And it really has to do with issues that are happening at home that no one's really addressing at the school. Because this is really the last stop for 98% of the kids here. Like if we don't get them off into something else, like there are no other options.
Liz's hard work with her students hasn't gone unnoticed.
Where Finger was 4 years ago
And what you've done today,
is what I firmly believe.
there's a new Fanger because there's a new principal.
This is not really a black issue, it's not a white issue, it's not a Latino issue, it's not a South or a West Side issue, but it's really an issue of our children's lives and fighting for their lives. And ultimately, I really believe the fate of our city and our country. So I say to my staff and my students who are sitting right over there, welcome to the age of possibilities, because we started from the bottom and now we're here. Thank you.
Fenger High School.
So there's a lot of things I don't agree with in that clip. The notion of like saving someone, the notion they've left out the things I think about policy and a whole bunch of stuff. But I just wanted to give you a little sense from that clip what was happening at Finger High School when I first started. And the situation was pretty daunting. When you think about 1,500 kids, our graduation rate at that time was roughly about 40%. The dropout rate was about 20%. And actually the year I got to Finger, there were 300 arrests inside of the school building, not in the school perimeter, not in the neighborhood, inside of the school building. We had approximately 400 incoming ninth graders that year, give or take, and about 40% of them were reading at a third or a fourth grade reading level or below. Education was barely happening. I want to remind you of two things I said. One, we're talking about 1,500 young Black students, beautiful students who aspired to attend college. They had hopes, they had dreams for various careers, they aspired to great things. The second thing I want to remind you of is that James Baldwin quote. The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated. And here's what I realized, that the educational system is not broken. It's not broken at all, contrary to popular belief. This is an expansive and intricate system of dehumanization that was constructed to support white supremacy. It is built on anti-Blackness and is achieving its intended goal. Some of you may know Jay Gillen from the Algebra Project out of Baltimore. He talks about this idea of sharecropper education. And I think that's what we're doing for a lot of our young people across our country. Millions of our public school students receive only as much education as they need to do the work that they've been allotted in this generation. Sweeping malls, cleaning hotels, working at cash registers, patrolling whiter spaces as security guards. Jay talks about 6 years after graduation, the median annual income and earnings for former Baltimore City High School students is roughly $15,000 a year. Those students have been prepared for a $15,000 a year job, despite the official line of what we all tell ourselves is that our students are entitled to a world-class education. And I believe, I'm sure similar to what you do, that this justice has got to be disrupted. It's not just happening in Chicago or in Baltimore or in your city. It is happening across our country to millions of children. I believe the time is ripe for this, not just in this moment of what's happening, but I mean, even before the pandemic, we're living in an age of disruption. If you think about Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, these companies have all managed to essentially reinvent their respective industries. I mean, thanks to them, we've disrupted the way we shop, the way we commute, the way we sleep. I mean, for those of you who are old enough, if I would have told you 10, 15 years ago that you would think nothing of riding in a stranger's car or sleeping in a stranger's house when you went out of town and then paying, okay, you're paying your good coins for the privilege, you would say I was crazy. You would say I was absolutely crazy. But interestingly enough, in our country, we haven't disrupted the way we educate our children despite knowing what we know. As you can see from the quick examples of Uber and Airbnb, we as a country can be adaptive. We can reinvent. We can do that. I would argue that education itself needs to be liberated. Education itself needs to be dismantled in our country. So remember those young people that I told you about, my students that aspired to do great things at my school despite those numbers. I'm going to tell you what the numbers were when we got there, and then what they were afterward by the time that I had left. They were that dropout rate that was 20% went down to below 2%. The graduation rate that was 40% went to over 80%. Those arrests that were over 300 in any given year went to down below 0. Our children went to college. They did all things, right? Because that potential was always within them. So what's the shift? What did we do at Finger? And I want to focus on the how, because I think it relates to the question that we're talking about today. So there are 4 things I want to highlight for you today. And I'm going to start with this first one because to me, it really undergirds the next 3. And that first one is this: we must work to deliberately and consistently, we must work to decolonize our minds as educators, period. The interesting and complicated thing about colonialism is that it encompasses not just politics and economics, but consciousness. I don't know if you saw, there was this Kareem Abdul-Jabbar article in the Los Angeles Times, probably I would say maybe 5 to 6 weeks ago, somewhere in there. And he was talking about racism in America. And he basically said, racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible, even when you're choking on it, until you let the sun in, and then you see it is everywhere. And I would argue that's the same about a colonized mindset. Our ideas of the world, how we show up in classes, what we teach, expectations of students, what we believe about our communities. If we are not conscious, we are teaching from that framework of a colonized mind. Paulo Freire talks about this in Pedagogy of the Press, of those who authentically are going to commit themselves to the people. They must re-examine themselves constantly. And as educators, that's you, that's me, it's constant. It's not a fixed state that we ever arrive to. There is no arrival. It is a constant journey to decolonize, because we are constantly being bombarded as citizens of this country. We are constantly being bombarded by thousands of images and messages. So therefore, we must work constantly to decolonize our minds. And I think that's the first and the foremost, most important principle, the 4 I'm going to talk about, because I just know that our minds are the filter for all of our actions. The second thing I want to highlight is the idea of us being liberators versus overseers. I do work across the country and work with school districts and all the like. And it's interesting. And maybe you've seen this too if you visited other school districts and things, but there's this propensity of weighted control, especially when people work in environments that serve the majority Black children. And it's an overseer mentality to education. There's just this overbearing and disproportional emphasis on constant order, constant rules, constant discipline, constant structure, constant emphasis on behavior, and there's also a good dosage of rote memorization. It's an overseer mentality. I would argue that we all as educators of Black children should be liberators, and we should be promoting creativity, exploration, co-creation, critical thinking, student voice in student learning, students as design partners, cross-pollination of subject areas, i.e. real world problem solving. It's a mindset, and it's grounded in a purpose, and it's connected to the idea that as educators, again, we're liberators. We're not running a pity party. There's no room for your missionary work. Kids believe what their teachers think. So I'm gonna share a story about one of my teachers. We'll call her Miss K. And I was in her classroom one day, and I was observing one of her lessons. And I observed the lesson. I noticed that she's teaching all basically juniors and seniors. And she was basically on the very bottom rung of Bloom's taxonomy, which you all know. And I brought her into my office, and we were debriefing the lesson and talking about what she was teaching, why she was teaching it. And we talked about the how. And I was really pushing her on that, really talking to her about, like, you know, what she was doing and why it wasn't going to work. And she said to me, but you know, Ms. Dozier, our kids they're behind, and we have to, you know, I have to make them feel validated, and I have to make them feel good. And I was pushing back on that. And I said to her, you know, but, you know, how are we learning and helping our students grow? And she said to me, I will never forget this. She said to me, but I love them. And I don't want our young people to feel bad. I love them. And I said to her, you know what you're doing? You're doing exactly what educators do across the country when they come in on this missionary crazy. You're loving them to death. Knowledge and confidence, that's what we need to be building in our children. Knowledge and confidence that helps them to fight systemic racism and to live into their true purpose. The third thing I'll just chat on is just developing a positive racial identity. And there are examples you can find across the board, and you're educators, you know that. I think sometimes we get stuck at trying to do everything all at once and not knowing where to get in. And so I would just encourage you to think about, you know, where are the gaps in the curriculum, whether it's with pieces of Black literature, or how are Black authors showing up, or how many scientists, mathematicians, and obviously not just during Black History Month. How are we acknowledging home culture and knowledge as an asset? Again, we live in this colonized world, and we receive thousands of images and messages that would negate a positive racial identity. So it's so critical that as educators, as school leaders, that we counter this in the environments in which we control. I want to share an image with you. And the image actually ran in the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper. And I'll describe it for you in case it's hard to see on your screen. But the image ran in the Chicago Sun-Times newspaper about 10 years ago. It was roughly when I first started my principalship at Finger High School. And we had a young man who, Darian Albert was his name, who was beaten to death about a mile away from our school. And it was a traumatic time for our young people, for our community, for our parents, for that family. It was a traumatic time. And this cartoon ran in the Chicago Sun-Times, I'd say about a week or two after it happened. If you can't see the cartoon, I'll describe it to you. It shows on the left-hand side some iconic imagery of Chicago. And on the right-hand side, it shows what appears to be a graveyard, but it's labeled Finger High School. This is the type of, and this isn't a major newspaper, right? This is not, you know, somebody's random, you know, newspaper they, you know, pulled together on their computer. It's the Chicago Sun-Times. But this is a visual example, I believe, of what society thinks of and breathes about Black children. And so it's important that, again, we do things that create a positive racial identity, that counter messages that they hear and see every single day just by existing. The fourth thing I'll talk about is just holistic approaches. If this is near and dear to my heart, because I think that too often times children, especially Black children in our country, we too often try to splice them up, and we care about the parts of them that yield particular counted and measured results. So we care about the part of them that yields test scores, or the part of them that counts on our attendance metrics, or the part of them, you get the gist of what I'm saying, right? But I believe as educators, as liberators, as people who are responsible for Black children's lives, we must look at this as a holistic way of like, how are we helping build better human beings? How are we taking care of our village? I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of my mistakes in the holistic approaches area, because I think it's interesting. I think it shows where we can all go wrong, even the quote unquote well-intentioned. So I'll show you a picture really quick. This woman that you'll see on the left, you can guess what she does for a living. Everybody knows. That's a nun. All day, every day, full stop, that's a nun. But what you wouldn't guess is that nun is actually my mom. That's a whole nother story. That's going to have to be part 2 next week. I'm not going to get into all that today, okay? But I'll tell you that that's my mom, and she was a nun for almost 20 years before she met my dad and ultimately left the convent. But when she did, when she became a mom, and how we kind of grew up, my mom, didn't leave that nun stuff behind. She was a nun through and through in a lot of ways. I mean, she was strict, she was structured. If there was a thing that my sister or I did wrong, there was always a consequence. She was very tidy in that sense of like things fit in a box. And so that influenced me and how I thought of the world in terms of if you make a mistake, there's a consequence and you kind of get back on the right track. So you can imagine with that mentality, right? Still having this pro-Black mentality, but coming into the school, I believed in that. Like I walked into the school and we had all these arrests happening and things, going on that weren't supposed to happen, and fights and things that were happening. In my first mind, I said, all right, we're gonna put some quote unquote structure in here. We're gonna have consequences. And so I got this big whiteboard, those big whiteboards on wheels that they're huge. I mean, they're huge. And I took the top, I'm not proud of this, but I think it's an important learning moment. I took the top 75 kids that were causing the most disruption out of the 1,500. And I had a picture of them and I marked it red, yellow, and green. And if you were in the red or in the yellow, I was trying to get you up out of Finger High School because you weren't about to be at that school. And what I realized as time went on, I was doing nothing but perpetuating the exact same system that I was fighting against. And I wasn't acknowledging the trauma that a lot of our young people faced. And so as I think about this idea of holistic approaches, it's rooted in the idea of, do we love Black children as educators? Do I love Black children? And so if I love Black children, I have to acknowledge that our kids face a lot and we have to therefore do a lot to make sure they're able to show up as whole people. And so for us at Finger High School, it meant implementing a whole system, school-wide system of restorative justice. It meant building into the actual school day mental health and wellness services for all of our students, everything from anger management to grief counseling. It meant really physically changing the environment, making our environment more of a family, more of a home. It meant individualized support for students, academic interventions. It meant working with parents. It was all about community. And that was huge. And again, I'll come back to the question of and I'd ask you to ask yourself too, is how do we love Black children? So I'll close with this and I'll just say, as I think about what's happening today in 2020 and what's being talked about, both in education and in terms of just health overall of our country, COVID-19 has really been our report card, if you will, our report card on racial equity. And we have failed as a country in every single manner of that. That's the fast crisis, if you will, that's happening. We failed in every single manifest of that. However, I would cause us to really think about and fight against and fight for something better for what's driving the slow crisis. Because what's driving the slow crisis of all of the stuff that's perpetuating the fast crisis is ultimately systemic racism, it is oppression, it is the things that we know. So acknowledging, yes, there is the fast crisis, but there is also a slow crisis that we must fight to do better with. And that is so important. It took decades for us to get here, centuries, in fact, in some of the metrics that we're talking about. But we have to continue to work on that slow crisis in order to do true reform, in order to get people to the point of having an actual free society, a free and equitable society for our children to live in. At the same time, I think it is critical that while we're working on that slow crisis stuff, we still have to be vigilant. We still have to do our best in our schools every single day to make sure that we are setting the stage for our young Black minds. I believe that as teachers, as educators, we are nation builders, we are liberators. And we take that approach and we have that mindset as we walk into our virtual classrooms. There is a different way in which we are educating because we are building for the future and our children are those burning blocks. There's a quote, which I'm sure you know well, and it's about this: to teach Black children is a revolutionary act. And so I say to you, go forth in that revolution and take it as seriously as it needs to be taken, for you are setting the stage for our future. So with that, I want to turn it over to my co-presenters, who I'm so thrilled to be presenting with, and we're going to have a conversation a little bit after this, but I want to turn over to Mike Brown and to Sundiata Salaam. Tell you a little bit about them. Mike Brown has spent the last 20 years fighting educational inequality in urban schools as a teacher and as a principal. He currently serves as a director of leadership development at Freedom Prep in Memphis, Tennessee. And Sundiata Salaam has spent the last 14 years as a teacher, a principal, and a network leader fighting educational inequality in our schools. And he currently serves as the Chief People Officer at Freedom Preparatory Academy in Memphis, Tennessee. It is a pleasure and honor to present with both of you, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. My name is Mike Brown, and my teammate is?
I am Sundiata Salaam, and just very happy to be here and humbled to go after Liz, who we got an opportunity to talk with earlier and who promised us that she would only take 5 minutes, and she just took a little longer, and that's okay. We're gonna be okay with that. But no, just humbled to go after Liz. I don't think that we have the right to be in the same room as her. So I'm just appreciative to be here and to go after her.
What Liz does not know is, Salaam and I were both principals, and I was our principal in a turnaround, and I had seen the documentary. And going into a turnaround situation in Memphis, Tennessee, I was new to the city, new to the area, new to the location. Those newspaper articles, I understand. And what she does not know is that while she was out in Chicago, I watched that documentary from Memphis, Tennessee, and it inspired me to do the hard work of being a turnaround principal. So thank you for inspiring me from miles away. And for everybody who's on this call, and to the State of Black Learning team, thank you. And I do not want to pass up this moment. It's an honor for us as Black and Brown leaders to come together and speak on behalf of and engage in conversations about education. It is not lost upon me that there was just a few years ago, in our not so distant history, where when Black leaders were getting together talking education, they had to do it in silence. They had to do it in hiding. And I love the fact and understand, and these are our ancestors. And so while the people in this room, thank God, we might have more degrees than our ancestors had and were able to get. We might have more knowledge. We might have more classroom experience, but I promise you that it is on the shoulders of our ancestors that we stand. And had it not been for their struggle, and they pay for their struggle in blood. A lot of times we pay for it on social media. We might pay for it in careers. They paid in blood. And so I honor, and we honor their acts of liberation through education so that we can be here today. So I just want to give honor to them before we moved on. There are 4 I guess quotes were forced statements from some living and some passed on ancestors who we kind of center our work around. And it's interesting because Liz, you just mentioned this, and so our first quote, and this is from Dr. Asa Hilliard, who's who his daughter, from my understanding, this week just passed away, his young daughter. And so who was also a professor carrying on his work. So we give honor to her and also for his life. But one of the quotes that we ground our work in is, number one, it says, it took an educational effort that was systematic, intensive, and unparalleled to erase these memories and to cloud the vision among African Americans. Once reference points were lost, African Americans as people became like a computer without a program, a space without a homing device, and a dependent without a benefactor.
Now read number 2. The first lesson in the humanities is to make people aware of their own contribution to civilization. And the second lesson is to teach them about other civilizations and with proper appraisal.
And third, from Dr. Malefe Asante, it says Latino and Black students who don't know our history are injured in the most fragile parts of the psyche, lacking reinforcement in their own historical experiences. They become psychologically crippled, hobbling along the margins of the European experiences. And this is exactly what our schools look like in so many situations.
Yeah. And to Liz's point about the decolonization of the mind and the importance of that, Carter G. Woodson was talking about that a very long time ago when he wrote in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, that the thought of the inferiority of the Negro is drilled into him in almost every class he enters and in almost every book he studies.
And this idea that that education, and Liz, you also spoke about this. You can advance the slide. Liz, you also mentioned this, that the idea of, our educational system, what we're seeing right now, our disparate outcomes are not a result of a broken educational system. They are the results of a system that is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And we are going to, for a few minutes, go into specifics about the historical documentation of how school was set up as a colonizing force. And we have to be careful because as educators, whether we're Black educators, white educators, Latino, Indigenous educators, whoever you are, if we are not in schools every day empowering students culturally, then we're colonizing them by default. There is no in between. There is no neutral. And so let's look at how schools have been set up to be colonizing forces. So the group that you're looking at right now, they are the original people of the Papua Islands. Now, just to kind of give us some geographic reference, the Papua Islands are the island chains near Australia. And so these are the same, they are the indigenous people of the Australian islands and the countries, surrounding countries. That's what the original Australians and Papuans look like. In 1500, the Papua Islands were colonized by the Portuguese. Now, the Portuguese also at the same time, right before they colonized the Papua Islands, they had just visited West Africa and began what we now call the transatlantic slave trade in West Africa. They were one of the first countries that were there. And one of the first countries in West Africa that the Portuguese went to was a place called Guinea in West Africa. And so when the Portuguese then came to colonize the Australian islands and the Papua Islands, they came and they saw the people in the Papua Islands. They said, hold on, y'all look like the people in West Africa. You look like the people in Guinea. And so the Portuguese then renamed the island Papua New Guinea because you look like the New Guinea. And so they actually renamed the island from the Papua Islands to New Guinea. And so sometimes just in honor of those indigenous people, you'll hear me referred as Papua Islands and not necessarily New Guinea. But years later, the British would also come to recolonize the Papua Islands around the 1800s. This is familiar because this is also a story that the British did in America, in the States. And so they colonized the Papua Islands, colonized the islands of New Guinea. And the British had a very, very unique style of colonization. And what they would do is they would bring their military to conquer the island first. And then after they brought the military, they would bring their teachers. That was their process. They would first bring their military, then they would bring their teachers. And the understanding was, if we brought the military, we can forcefully take over the island. But as soon as the island was forcefully taken over, if we gave them our teachers and our education, we would no longer need our military because people would then subjugate themselves. They would already be a conquered people. It would never fight back. And so first thing they did was when they colonized the schools, they took over the schools, they started to change the language. And so whenever they wanted to refer to a young lady, in the Papua Islands, they would call her Pickaninny. Does that sound familiar? That also translated back to America, because remember, the British, the same people who colonized Papua Islands in the 1800s, also colonized America. Whenever they went to talk to a young boy around the same age, 8, 9 to 10-year-old boy, this is what they called him: monkey. And remember, this is said with the British Australian accent, and so hence the spelling. They call them monkeys. If they were ever talking about a grown man, this means a young boy's father. His name was Boy. And whenever you were talking about the white colonizers, the teachers, their name was Master. And remember, this was not taught by the military. This was taught by the schools. The British did not just stop in the Papua Islands, as we know. They also traveled to Africa, where they began their huge participation in the transatlantic slave trade. And so when they got there, they not only wanted to take Africans, expel them from the country to bring them to their new lands, but they also wanted to colonize the lands that were in Africa as well. And so, interesting enough, there's a gentleman named Lord Macaulay, and that's the picture that you see. Lord Macaulay was a military leader. This was in February 2nd, 1835. And in order to talk about the system of colonization that happened in schools, we try to get primary documents that you can hear it from the people's mouths themselves. Because whenever you tell it from Black and brown people, we're conspiracy theorists. We want you to hear from the people who are actually doing this. This is what Lord Macaulay said when he went to Africa. Now, mind you, he's going to call Africa a country because he doesn't know any better. Now, he's in the British Parliament, but he doesn't know any better, so he calls Africa a country. But these were his words from a speech that he delivered in the British Parliament.
So he said, I have traveled across the length and breadth of Africa, and I have not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is her spiritual and cultural heritage. And therefore, I propose that we replace her old and ancient education system, her culture. For if the Africans think that all that is foreign in English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation. Lord Macaulay's address to the British Parliament. This is 1835, right? And so even when we're looking at this, you're seeing he's in military regalia. And there's nowhere in here where he's saying we need to beef up our defense fund. We need to put more military into this area, and this is what's going to happen. He said that the way that we can actually conquer the nation is to replace the ancient education system, the culture, and to shift the way it is that they were thinking. Not only was this done here, it was done in multiple places the British went. And so if you look into India, this is the same sort of idea. You're talking about India, a place which had multiple universities. When they went there, they said there was so much schooling happening in India that they had no need to place education in certain places, because all the places, all the villages were having at least 1 to 3 schools that were there. And we've got to shift this so that they can believe that everything that they have is bad and everything that we have is better.
It's interesting because Lord Macaulay became so good at this around the world that the term of colonizing school and curriculum became called Macaulayism.
Right.
That's how good he was at this. And interesting because Salaam was talking about his military regalia. What the British usually did, because remember, they associated military first for conquering and then education, and that continues to conquering. They usually transfer their lords of war, their military generals, usually then became school superintendents. It was a natural transition. So usually the Secretary of Defense became the Secretary of Education. That is how they conquered.
Yeah, and someone asked a question about the name that the Portuguese referred to different people, and it often depended where the Portuguese went, right? And so we know from different documents in West Africa that the Portuguese referred to the people there as, that's where the origin of the term Negro and nigger came from, was the Portuguese referring to the people who they were capturing as Negro. So, but depending on where the Portuguese went and different people went, they used different names to refer to people in order to, and they were purposely not calling them by the names in which that the people chose for themselves.
And for those who are looking, I see the person who asked the question, we can send you different copies of different slides. We have our email that we'll share at the end. As long as you send us the email, we'll go ahead and we'll gladly share some of the information from these slides. Thank you.
And so the other thing to remember is that this is not something that was done just in other places in the world, right? That it has a direct effect on what was happening here in the Americas. And so you're looking currently at some of the natives who were here in this land, and I want us to take a moment to look specifically at the way that they are dressed, right? Looking at their clothing, and we know that after the different European colonists and different European colonialism that happened to these people, that they were dressed this way and shifted to be dressed this way. And I don't want anyone to minimize this, even to the point of saying, oh, they just made them change their clothes. Every single element of what the natives had on had specific meaning to their particular tribe or their particular nation. From the feather, the size of the feather, the color of the feather, what they were wearing, the animal clothes they were wearing, how they were wearing it, all those things were extremely important to who they were as a people. And so to shift their clothing was not merely shifting their garbs. It was literally shifting an entire identity and erasing a people completely by shifting all these things. Even the hair, completely different, right? This is the same thing that was happening in Papua, in the Papua Islands, and that was happening in the other places where Europeans went, that they also brought into this land. And right now I'm going to show a brief video. I'm going to actually stop sharing, restart it, because I don't think I hit the optimize. There we go. And we're going to go right back to it. We're going to play this video really quickly. And what you're going to be looking at is an example of the type of schools that they were bringing to the Americas.
Johnny wanted to go back home. It was 1,000 kilometers away. They forced him to go to the Indian residential school. More than 150,000 of us children had to go. They wanted to change us.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name.
Hallowed be your name.
Thy kingdom come.
Thy kingdom come.
Thy will be done.
Thy will be done.
Kill the Indian and the child. It's been called cultural genocide. I survived residential school. My brother Johnny did not.
Chani Wenjack was one of thousands of children who died due to Canada's residential school system. More than 80,000 survivors and their families still live with its legacy today.
And the important part, I oftentimes like to pause after that video, because that video oftentimes makes me emotional just watching that video. But one of the things, he said, I survived, my brother did not. But what does that surviving even look like? Right? The things that they did in these schools. John B. Riley, who was an Indian school superintendent, said, only by complete isolation of the Indian child from his savage antecedents can he be satisfactorily educated. And the extra expense attended thereon is more than compensated by the thoroughness of the work. This was the philosophy that they had in these schools that they called the Indian schools, or the Carlisle Indian Industrial Schools. Richard Pratt, who was a part of an organization called the Friends of the Indians. The infamous statement, he said, kill the Indian, save the man. He was a part of a group called Friends of the Indians. This was their idea of being friends. And if you notice, he has on military regalia. Most of the time, the people who were in the military, who were called secretaries of war, became the ones who were in charge of the educational institutions. That was the shift they made. Secretary of War to now in charge of education. And he said, kill the Indian, save the man. Native education, look at the difference in the pictures here. From the moment students arrived at school, they could not be Indian in any way. To aid in their assimilation to U.S. Anglo culture, boarding school administrators forbade, whether in school or on reservation, tribal singing and dancing, along with the wearing of ceremonial and savage clothes, the practice of native religions, the speaking of tribal languages, the acting out of traditional gender roles. This was the type of education they were given to natives. But oftentimes when we do these particular presentations, we have a huge contingency, including us, of people who are like, yeah, that's terrible. Look what was happening. But I want you all to really pay attention to the language and think about how we at times may fall into this idea. What is it that we want to take away from our students to make sure they are satisfactorily educated? What is it in sometimes that we try to kill in our students in the idea of saving them from what it is that they're going through? What is it that we don't want them to be in any way that sometimes helps us to be the aider in their assimilation to U.S. Anglo culture?
Carnegie Woodson very, very quickly says the same thing that Lord Macaulay admitted in in the 1830s. So Carnegie Woodson, 100 years later, 1933, in America says American schools have been set up to play up before the Negro all of his crimes and shortcomings, and they do this so that we would love everything that is European. We would love the Hebrew, we would love the Greek, love the Latin, and the Teuton, which they call Greeks. And it said that with this, it will lead the Negro to detest the man of African blood and to hate himself. This is what his entire book about the miseducation of the Negro was about. And so as we move on, Albert Einstein, coming to America from Nazi Germany as a Jew. He was a Jewish scientist who escaped Germany, who escaped Hitler, came to America. And when he came to America, he saw the situation of blacks in America and saw how they were being treated. And he said, I can escape the feeling of complicity in it only by speaking out. He was not talking about Hitler's Germany. He was talking about our America. He left Hitler and said, in America, I have to speak out and I can't be complicit. This is where most of us see that picture of Albert Einstein speaking to a room full of black educators at the board. That is when he said, I cannot be complicit and I have to speak out. And for all those on this call that may look like us as panelists, black, brown, proud of who we are, Alice Walker also gives us a quote that basically says, when the axe came into the forest, the tree said, the handle is one of us. So please let's sit in that. Our black and brownness does not make us more culturally relevant. It does not make us naturally empowering to black and brown kids. If we don't interrogate the schools that we grew up in, if we don't interrogate the curriculum that we teach kids, we will unknowingly and mistakenly feed them the same poison that we were fed. Absolutely. So we're going to go through and we're going to literally just kind of jump in and say, when we're in schools, this is exactly how it looks. And so I want you guys, as your teachers, as leaders, I want you to identify this in our schools. And remember, all of us have done some version of this. So forgive yourselves. But this is why we're here together at this conference, learning together. And so as Liz said earlier, forgive yourselves for what you did not know when you did not know it. As we learn more, now it's up to us to do better. So explicit curriculum, we always understand that. This is by Elliot Eisner. That is what you teach. That is what's on the kids' report card. Everyone knows the subjects. Is explicitly what we teach in our curriculum. The no curriculum at the bottom is what we explicitly do not teach. In other words, our school does not have driver's ed. So driver's ed is part of the no curriculum of our building. But racism and colonization in our schools lives in the implicit curriculum. I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like. So I just went to a general history book. And this was a world history book. And if you look at it, it's called, in the table of context, this unit is called Early Civilizations, Prehistory through AD 1570. That's a long time. Look at chapters 1 through 6. There is a word that is not there that should be there. If you think about where all life started, where all mankind started, the continent is called Africa. Africa is not in chapters 1 through 6. And the unit is called Early Civilizations and Prehistory. What they do is in chapter 2, they throw in Egypt. But remember, they pair Egypt with the Middle East, which means that because we have shown you light-skinned Egyptians, and we've never talked about Egypt being a part of Africa, they can say Egypt, and we as students make no connection to who our people are. And so in chapters 1 through 6 of Early Civilizations, there is no mention of the word Africa. And so therefore, what they're saying is, And implicit curriculum is not what they say explicitly. Implicit curriculum is what they don't say and what you start to understand because of what is not said. That's what makes it implicit. And so implicitly, they let you know Africa has no place in civilization. Because when we call it early civilizations, we never mentioned it. Let's go through some more. Let me go to another history book really quickly. And these are different history books. This is called World History. Once again, it should be about world history. It's units 1 through 8, 36 chapters. And these are all the chapters that talk about white European history. This is world history. But these are all the chapters that talk about white and European history. So what we understand is our students are not and we're not teaching world history. We're teaching white, westernized European history. And then we wonder why Black and brown kids are failing our subjects. Understand the tests that we are forced to take every year are not measuring intelligence capacity. They are measuring our kids' ability to internalize white supremacy through curriculum. And for those who don't do well, they fail. And our kids, before they ever drop out physically, they will drop out mentally. And this is why. So maybe the kids that are failing in our schools are not the ones who don't get it. Maybe they're the ones who refuse to get it. They are what we call revolutionaries. And unfortunately, for those of us who get it too well, we also then fight the rest of our lives trying to love our people again because we were taught to hate them because we mastered this curriculum.
Yeah, Mike, the irony, I don't know about anyone else here, but every once in a while I watch Jeopardy. And whenever there's that deal with African history or other history, they never buzz in. I get so angry every time. I'm like, oh, so is that what the problem is? And so I know that I could do really well on Black Jeopardy if that ever existed.
Let's go. Interesting. For those of us that teach Latino and Indigenous students, one of the things that hurts me the most, and as a teacher, once again, forgive yourself for what you did not know, I did this and I got checked. Because I was then teaching in Boston, Massachusetts, or in Lynn, Massachusetts, rather, to a school or a class full of Dominican students from Dominican Republic. And I'm teaching them about these 4 guys. And so I'm just a history teacher. I'm just an ELA teacher. I'm teaching what the curriculum says. And I'm teaching about Hernan Cortez and Coronado and Pizarro and Colon, Cristobal Colon, or we know him as Christopher Columbus. I'm teaching about them, and you can do the next few, you can advance a little bit. But I'm teaching about these people, these conquerors, but what I didn't realize was that my students were the ones who were being conquered, and I never talked about who they were. And so for us, we're sitting in a class teaching about the people who conquered them and never even said, but let me tell you about the civilization that they ruined. And that's who our kids represent. Here's another form of implicit curriculum. Once again, let's go to history. Right now, I just want to look at that first history book that's in the top left corner. There is something that's historically inaccurate and just wrong. This is how implicit curriculum works. If you look at that first history book, it says Herodotus Histories. The problem is that they have a picture of a sphinx. The Sphinx is in Egypt, which is once again on the continent of Africa. It was an African civilization, 1000%. Herodotus is Greek. So they give you the picture of this African achievement and they put the name of a Greek on top of it. So therefore, by the time a kid is in 4th grade, they've already associated these Greeks with these African advancements. This is how implicit works. And Socrates and Homer, these are the names, keep going, these are the names in math and science and ELA and humanities that we all learn about. So whatever classroom you teach, you are teaching these names as the history of your curriculum. And the problem is that these are the kids that we're teaching it to. These are kids that we're teaching it to. So very quickly before we go, and we can't talk about the problems of colonization and how we colonize our kids and then leave and say thank you. So we got to just give you just some, we got to give you some understandings of if they've taken our people out of the curriculum, if they've taken us out of schools because they were trying to colonize us, how as Black and brown leaders of color on this call can we put our people right back into it? So right now, we're just going to give a few facts and then we're going to call it a day. But if you go back really quick to Salaam, this is Ivan Sertima. And so if you're teaching history, put your history textbooks down, use Ivan Sertima instead. And so when he's going to talk about Egypt right now, he's not talking about Egypt in the corner of Northern Africa that the Europeans said was Egypt. We are talking when the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians talked about Egypt, and when they talked about their lands, they mentioned all the people that were in green. So therefore, when they're talking about their ancient people, they're talking about the Sudanese, people from Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. So when I say Egypt, that's what we're talking about. And the Egyptians that are praised all the times, they say our grandfathers started in Central Africa. We are just the results of their brilliance. So they say that the deeper in Africa you go, that's where the advancements came from. So Salaam, let's just share with them just some African advancements, and then we'll move on.
So here we have chemistry is Kemetan science, and originally called alchemia, meaning black art. Algebra is actually aljabar, which means the reunion of broken pieces. I'll read a few more. If you were to write a book of 1,000 pages, you would not put down names of all Greeks who went to Nile Valley in ancient Egypt to study. Awaiting death, Socrates admits, I studied philosophy and medicine in Egypt, and that he plagiarized work of the Ethiopian philosopher Aesop. I avail myself some of Aesop's fables. He used the fancy word availed himself of them.
But we call Socrates a philosopher, and we say Aesop's fables.
Right. I'm gonna skip a few if that's okay. The idea of no written languages in Africa is false. They had a Mande script, Proto-Saharan script, Akan script, Meroitic script, hieroglyph, Kemetic Hieratic, and Demotic, the Night script, Vai, Wadi script, etc.
And all these were BC scripts.
Yep. And last one I'm going to read, Hippocrates. Actually, two more I'm going to read. Let me go to Isaac Newton. Said the Egyptians concealed mysteries above the capacity of the herd, such as the knowledge that the earth orbited the sun and not vice versa, before either Ptolemy or Copernicus were born. And so we often like to say that we will study European mistakes before we actually study the accuracy of the people who came before them, right? And last but not least, Hippocrates copied North African medical journals from Cahun and Papyrus on this technology word for word, and was named the father of medicine, right? They take the Hippocratic oath before they become doctors, and Hippocrates copied these things from people of African descent. And so in out, because I know for time's sake, and I saw some question answers that do deal with some other slides we have. A few other things, right? Like you see here, Pluton, Diana, Jupiter. These are all names of planets that came from Roman gods, right? And it wasn't because the Romans themselves found the planets. Actually, they didn't find the planets, but the International Astronomical Union, which was established in 1919, decided the names of these planets and was deciding that the names should be named after Roman figures, right? And they even had the moons named after Greek figures because they were highlighting and trying to highlight the European past rather than the people who had actually discovered things in astronomy that they hadn't discovered before. And so what ends up happening, and these are some things also about indigenous Americans, right? You have here more than 120 drugs prescribed by world physicians today are derivatives from plants discovered and used by Southwest and South American native physicians. So these people who you see up at the top were the doctors and the botanists and the people who discovered these things, but we just oftentimes call them witch doctors. And that's no knock to the name witch doctors, but we call them witch doctors and we refer to these people as actual doctors. This is the way that we have moved in terms of education. And because of that, you oftentimes have situations like this one, to where you can actually have someone stand in front of an actual botanist, a doctor, a scientist who is able to utilize the land appropriately here and think that they have some sort of moral standing to be standing. I'm gonna stop there. Mike, did you want to say anything else?
That's it. So the idea that school is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing is the absolute truth. And they haven't been measuring our kids' intelligence. They've been measuring their ability to, once again, take on and understand and internalize white supremacy. And as Black and brown leaders in this room, it's our job to make that transformation and to really make our schools places of empowerment, not just through our discipline systems, not just through our school cultures, but also attacking what we actually put in front of kids for 7.5 hours a day, which is their math, science, ELA, and of course, subjects curriculum. Thank you, guys.
Thank y'all. And I'm stop sharing, but to the questions that were being asked, there are a couple of things that we have that we can pull up during the question and answer period. And I think I'm going to read. Yep.
Yeah, so Liz can come on back. We have a couple of questions from both her segment and yours, so you guys can kind of decide how you want to flow through that.
I can start off. I see one in the chat. I'll just read it out loud. It says, why have teachers and principals within the school system essentially not liberated those in the school system by promoting homeschooling more to those children and who are in households that can do it? Homeschooling with their own anti-racist curriculum before the system tears them down. To that, I will say yes. I think there are educators out here who are advocating for school homeschooling, but the push I always talk about is, when I think about what needs to happen in our country, like we all can't afford to homeschool for obvious reasons, right? But is that true that the whole system itself needs to be completely dismantled? And a lot of times people will say, well, that's unrealistic, that's too big, we can't change the system. But I would argue that it's also unrealistic to imagine the same system doing something different, broadly speaking, for our children. And it's important for us to imagine that there has to be radical imagination really on all sides of the debate. And it may take radical imagination to envision like a world, for example, without police and prisons, but it also takes a very bold imagination to believe that it's possible to stop unjustified, racialized police killings within an institution that is built on those characteristics. And the same, I think, parallel is for education too. So I think, to me, the end goal that we're all should be moving towards is, again, dismantling the whole system. And obviously in the meantime, we have children in front of us. And so we need to be thinking about, to Mike and Salaam's point, like what is actually happening in our schools? What are we teaching them? So on and so forth. So.
And I would love to add on to that, to Liz's point, the idea that, we really, really can overhaul the whole school system. And yes, it's not a quick process, but we can. And if we ever, as people, like, part of the colonization that we've received, even as Black and brown educators, is that we worry about our ability to do it. We worry about our ability to start our own NBA, to start our own NFL. We worry about our ability to start our own schools. But to be honest, the year that slavery ended, and we don't talk about this much, but in 1865, as soon as slavery ended, when our ancestors ran off of those plantations, and they found their own places to live, not only were they searching, to start their own lives, with just make sure of food, shelter, and clothes, but within the first year of the end of slavery, by 1866, they had opened up 500 self-sustained, fully funded, fully operational schools in the southern. Mind you, this is before the southern region had an idea of publicly funded schools that all kids went to. And so the idea that the South, after slavery, starts to institute this thing called public schooling was, as Du Bois says, was a purely Negro idea. They saw the school systems that we, as former slaves, started. And so if our people did it a year out of slavery, guess what? We can do it again.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So oh, go ahead, Sundiata.
No, please go ahead, Ree.
All right, so we have another question. It says, Brother Mike, thank you, fam. Where can teachers begin within a standardization of the state?
Can you repeat that question one more time? I want to make sure we have it.
And what we can do is answer him live. That might be better.
Let's do it. All
right, all right. Here we go. All right, so Cisco, I'm getting ready to unmute you, sir. Get ready. All right, Cisco.
Cisco, where you from?
Hey, what up, Mike, man? I'm from Lynn.
Man, guys, one day we'll have a whole 1 hour panel session with Cisco. Cisco is a community activist, turned his life around, and has been leading gang work in the city of Lynn, Massachusetts, putting his life on the line daily. He is one of my idols, Cisco. It is an honor, sir.
Hey, you're the man. Hey, thank you guys. I appreciate y'all. Much love for you, Mike, man. My wife is a revolutionary teacher, so I just wanted to ask, in her sake, how can a teacher galvanize and kind of construct within a standardized, a system that's standardized and set up to not allow that stuff.
Oh man, thank you, Cisco.
Love,
Guys,
Mike.
can I take 3 minutes to show that?
Mm-hmm.
So Cisco, as a school principal, man, we understand exactly what you mean, because teachers are like, look, I want to blow up the system, but I'm an English teacher, I'm a math teacher, so I'm gonna go to my math people. So if you're a math teacher, you're like, look, for one, I'm not a history person, I'm just teaching math, and math is not just numbers. It is not just numbers. Math is also historical. And I also understood that as principals, me and Salaam talk about as principals, if we could not translate our revolutionary acts and education into students also being able to read and write and pass tests, if we cannot show the state that our kids are on point, then they would close our schools down. And so here's how we taught our teachers and then had them incorporated into their daily lessons. So really, really quickly, look at the source. Because once again, we try to use the earliest sources possible. This is about Pythagoras. So the only time we heard about Pythagoras is when we talk about the Pythagorean theorem in math. And so all math classes teach Pythagorean theorem. And so while Monday, our teacher is teaching just the formatting and the conceptual framework of what the Pythagorean theorem is, kids understand how to do it. On Tuesday, when they walk in, this is their first assignment. After day one of learning Pythagorean theorem, this is what they walk into as their due now for day 2. Salaam, if you can read this, please.
I'll be happy to. It says, according to Iamblichus, Pythagoras spent 22 years studying in the Egyptian temples, where he was taught astronomy, geometry, spirituality, and was immersed in the Egyptian mysteries. Here in Egypt, he frequented all the temples with the greatest diligence and studious research. Pythagorean theorem, which claims that any A angle, the square of the B, is equal to the C of the squares of the other side, has been attributed to Pythagoras. However, this theorem was long known to the ancient Egyptians and is in fact incorporated in the construction of the Great Pyramids. The surviving Rhiine mathematical papyrus dating back to about 1832 BC reveals the deep mathematical knowledge of the ancient Egyptians. Knowledge of the Pythagorean theorem is also said to have been known in other cultures such as in India, China, and Babylon, Iraq. Yet reading of the works by Egyptologists such as Albert Churchward proves that much knowledge obtained by ancient cultures had a main source, Africa.
And so this is what, and if you can go to the next slide, and so this is what you would have kids silently read. Notice that on the handout, when they answer questions, we changed the picture. So it went from Pythagoras, this white Greek, to these ancient Egyptians actually doing it on the walls where it originally started. So you have to also show them who did it, and they have to see this picture a million times. And these are the 5 questions that we give them to answer. So on Monday, the kids understand what the Pythagorean theorem is. That's for the test. And then on Tuesday, they understand in the first 10 minutes, this is the history behind the Pythagorean theorem. And the interesting thing is, they also even are able to say, this is when the Egyptians used it, and this is when the Greeks said they invented it. And the last question allows you to really have fun with your class and say, knowing the real history behind the Pythagorean theorem, what would you rename it? So that's where the question is. And then your kids will be very creative and give it all different kinds of names. And then when you're in class, when you have a culturally empowering class with Black and brown kids, when kids talk about the Pythagorean theorem, they'll say this. They'll say, well, the Pythagorean theorem that we call so-and-so, then they'll give you the format behind it. And so this is how, even in math, you bring in that authentic history to teach your kids the truth and empower them while also teaching them the concepts of math. And it looks like this in every subject. All right. Cisco, I hope that helps. And teachers on the call, I hope that helps. But all this stuff is standards aligned.
All right, we have another question from Victoria. She's asking, have you found any curriculums being used in schools that teach this true version of history? What specific resources do you have that are there for educators who want to push back on the current way that we teach history?
Can I show another quick slide? Salaam, can you show? So we had to change the people that we were reading. And so, yeah, keep going. So we changed the people that we're reading. And once again, this is for math teachers, science teachers, ELA teachers, and humanities teachers. Keep going to the authors, please. So
Author?
Yeah, yep.
That's the other way.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So we changed the people that we actually read. And here they are. So here are anthropologists, Egyptologists, and historians, and these are the main sources that I go to, and they are brilliant. And so if you start reading their text, they all five of them, all six of them rather, they all will actually talk about the greatness of ancient Africa, and they will give you the requisite knowledge that you need. So you don't have to read all six of them, read one of them. And I promise you, just one of their books, and if you have your lesson plans next to you, you'll be able to start to plug and place names, and they'll give you the authentic history of the sciences, of the maths, and of the ELAs and of the humanities. So this is where I would start. Next slide. If you are a white educator, I want to give you a white hero to go to. I want to show you white educators who have done the same kind of work. Here are 5 other educators. Tim Wise is among my favorite. And the last group, these are my educational inspirations. These are all academics. So these are people who often make that transition from the theory of race into what we're also professors and teachers. And this is how we incorporate that in our schools. And all of them are well-published authors. And so these are the people who I would go to. And I promise you, after just reading their things, you have the answers about what now to teach.
I'll just add on to that, at my school, what we ended up doing was exactly that. We couldn't find like one particular set of curriculum that was truth, right? And so we wound up actually essentially providing a lot of professional development resources and time, like paid time for teachers to actually do what Mike just described, to be able to sit with their lesson plan and pull different resources and actually craft things. It was really time intensive, but ultimately it was what we should be doing. And that's what we ended up doing.
Okay, so we have another question. Would it be a better strategy to focus on history first in education and then filter into math, science, reading, and writing? I ask because I know that there are studies that show higher achievement in Black students is coupled with students knowing a rich history of who they are.
I'm trying to wait to see if Liz is going to say something. If she is, I'm going to let her go first.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll follow up.
Yeah, I want us to I try and remember that history is a part of all of those particular subjects. Right? And so whenever there is sort of the goal to subjugate the history of people of African descent and people of color to just history, oftentimes what it does is it puts it in a particular room and says, here's the history of your people. And then they say, now let me teach you science. As if our history is not embedded in the creation of science, right? What Mike was sharing about the Egyptians, that's just one group, right? Because the pyramids were in Egypt, but they were also all the way down in Sudan. There were also pyramids that were found in Brazil. These are all places. Brazil, as a country currently, is the second largest country that has people of African descent in the world. And so a particular science that they were studying in Egypt and when they were creating these pyramids in all these different places was a science that we have yet to master today. We can the way the pyramids were built scientifically is absolutely phenomenal. I don't want to go too deep into that. But my point is, science is a part of the formulation of science is African. The formulation of analyzing text, being able to analyze what's around, being able to analyze the world, analyzing how this particular thing is moving so that I know where the fish are going, or so that I know how this is happening, how to analyze particular text in front of me. That reading, that is also African, right? One of the major universities that we often like to talk about in Africa, which is Timbuktu, was a major institution of reading. There were scholars coming from all over the place to Timbuktu to learn, and a lot of what they were doing was grappling with text. This was a time period in Islamic history in West Africa where you had different people from the Muslim world that were all coming to West Africa to learn from the scholars in West Africa. So my answer to that question would be, it has to be a sort of infiltration of all of it. I know that sounds like a lot, but knowing that science, math, and reading is African, it is it is indigenous American, it is Mexican, it is all of these things, then that means that when we're teaching them, we have to teach from that particular perspective, as well as looking at history and teaching the true history as well.
I couldn't have said it any better, so I'm glad you went first on that. I'll just add to it. I think one of the most dangerous things we can do as educators is to silo. And it's when kind of this idea of we have to take one thing first. Because I think then what happens unintentionally, but it happens, is it becomes some stapled on idea to other parts of education, what Brother Salaam had mentioned. Everything is interconnected and should be woven in and taught that way. And it's not as, I think this is part of, decolonizing our mindset. It's not as challenging as one might believe that it is.
Yeah. To add to that, when I was a first year teacher, I didn't know any better. I didn't understand standards and those particular things. And so the first time someone said, you have to teach the main idea and you have to teach kids how to get the main idea, I was like, my kids know how to get the main idea. They were just talking about a song earlier that they were getting the main idea. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to use Brenda's Got a Baby, and I'm going to make sure they get the main idea from Brenda's Got a Baby. And once I know that they understand the skill, how to work that skill of seeing text which is either written or that they can hear to get main idea, then I'll show them this particular text, right? And so in reading, for me, it can be very easy because reading is oftentimes based upon particular standards like main idea, theme, etc. And so I would see what book they would choose for it, and I would change the book. And I would still make students get main idea. I would still make them find theme, but I would always change the book, and I would always try and start with something, meaning our kids know what theme is. They do it every day. They always are doing things. So I just wanted to remind them, you know what theme is. And so this is what is popular. I'm using this. What's the theme of this? Oh, I got it. Cool. Now let's read this book. What's the theme? They're like, oh, it's easy. This is what the theme is. So it's not sometimes the mistake we make and I make is that we think that these concepts are foreign to them. They're not foreign. Our kids know theme. Our kids know main idea. They know how to do those things. It's just, utilize them in particular area.
And I also want to call out, I see in the comments, Russell Marsh. Hello, sir. Russell Marsh is doing great work at an independent school in New York. So it's great to see you on here. One of his questions, or one of his statements was he's talking about there's so many black women in education who are doing this very work on the ground and writing great text about it. And so to lift up Russell Marsh's point, we want to lift up Bettina Love, who talks about abolish education, who was one of the speakers keynotes last year at this conference. And so thank you, State of Black Learning, for introducing me for the first time to Bettina Love, who I've been following ever since. Russell Marsh also lifts up Dina Simmons, Goldie Muhammad. And so these are also people, if you want to learn how this looks on the ground, please read their works. And I also want to throw out somebody who is doing a lot of great work in New York, Long Island specifically right now. Her name is Erica Buddington, and she talks about decolonizing education.
Okay, one other thing. I was waiting on Liz again. But Cisco asked another question about wisdom that we can offer teachers to help them to manage the truth battles to focus on. The one thing I want to say to that is don't lose your job. Don't be so gung ho that you lose your job. And I'm not saying with the same sense, I'm not saying that you have to compromise so much that you lose yourself. What I am saying is the kids who you are working with, they need you. And so you got to figure out the way to do this. And our ancestors were masters of this, figuring out the way to wove a quilt appropriately to where someone saw it and knew that was a sign towards freedom. And I'm not suggesting that is exactly what you have to do, but I am saying our kids need you, so don't lose your job. And figuring out which battles to focus on. I think that is based upon the particular person or the particular issue that you may be facing in your particular area. But especially in these times, I think that the pushing of this sort of abolitionist education is becoming more popular than it was previously, and I think jumping on that is a good thing. But my number one thing to that question would be don't lose your job. our kids absolutely need. Even when I was a bad teacher, my first students recently posted on Facebook. They were like, "We were woke before woke was popular," and I was like, "Wow, I was a terrible teacher," but they were like, "You really did something for us." And so all that to not to talk about myself, but to say, don't lose your job.
And if Liz, if you could speak to, I'm going to put you on the spot, but if you could speak to, I see there's another question that talks about like how in the world, to Salaam's point, how do you do this within the system? Can you be revolutionary within a system, or do you have to leave the system? And I just think that your work in Chicago as a principal, everything that you were doing in the school within a larger system, but what did you do? How did you empower your kids to change the school around? So if you can lend some of your expertise to that question.
Yeah, and I apologize, I can't see the comments, so thank you so much for saying that. I do, I think that it is, oftentimes we try to create these like, false choices of it's either one or the other, and I do think there is room, as again, until the system is completely dismantled and we start over essentially and put our children at the center, until that day happens, I think there is room both to extract from the system and have our own, and there's also room, I think, for us to work within the system, similar to what Mike and Salaam were talking about in terms of what is infused in our classrooms, what curriculum are we putting in front of our children, what ideas, how do we approach learning. That was really the foundation of what we were trying to do at Finger High School, and what ultimately led to some of the success that we had.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, Liz, the question was, can radical change occur within the system that perpetuates such pain to our children? Can we begin building outside the institutions? How can our children achieve white supremacist standards while truly learning about themselves and loving their identities? Can learning white supremacy and Black love occur simultaneously within the school system?
That's
one of those questions we have the answer already too. They're like, nah, I know what my answer is. Just you better agree.
I don't know what that person's answer is then. Okay, I want to know what can you unmute them?
Yes, let me see. Let's see. They answered, well, it was anonymous, so it's all right though.
All right. Well, I'll give you, I think that this is why I think, to Salaam's point about do not leave the system, is so important, and do not get yourself fired from the system, because we need people in the system fighting for our children. Do I think it can be a holistic education built on the foundations of white supremacy? No. And that's why I think it's so important, even though it sounds unrealistic or too big, that the whole system needs to be dismantled. That truly is what we need to be fighting for, because there is no way to build an equitable educational system on top of something that was built in just the opposite way. I don't know if Mike or Salaam, if you have thoughts there too.
Yeah, this is the battle of our life, right? Like figuring out how do we exist within this craziness while still being ourselves, still living and not just surviving. This is the struggle of people of African descent and people of color in this country, period. So it's not going to be answered just in education. Like, this is a consistent struggle that Du Bois talked about, other people talk about, as well. But the only pause I'll have is this: radical work can be done in a classroom. So this idea that the system is controlling every single aspect of our movement, nah, you can do some radical work in the classroom. And if you are in a place where you feel like in the classroom, I have to do everything they're saying, and I can't talk about the achievements of our kids, and they just want me to look at the what is it called in English? I was an English major and I forgot the what is it called? Sorry?
Canon?
Yes, thank you. The canon. They only want me to look at the canon. If that's where you are, then maybe you do need to think about moving to a different place. And I'm not telling anyone to quit their job. I just said keep your job. But I am saying that if you're in a place where you feel like I have no movement out and what I'm doing is oppressive to my kids, then you may need to leave the oppressive situation. But I don't want to imply that it is all hope is lost in a school. You can do radical work in the classroom by shifting. Look, a lot of these standards are just things like, what is the main idea in English, right? Or teaching the Pythagorean theorem, or teaching how, hypothesis and those particular things in science work. You can radicalize that up. Because if you teach actually, you don't even have to radicalize. If you teach actually where it came from, that's radical enough. right? And so those things can happen inside the classroom. So all is not truly lost. The system ain't that powerful. Like the system has done some stuff, but we have always, as a people who have been oppressed by the system, we've always found ways around it. The fact that we're still here, that we have still survived, that we're still on this call, that we're still talking about this, is an actual evidence that we find ways around a system that pretends to have the power that we sometimes say we can get around that. And so I don't want to imply that it's just so daunting, because it's not. I don't feel it is as daunting. And maybe my woke card will be taken.
Korea, is it possible for those who these are some great questions. Is it possible that we can put our email in the chat for people who want more information, who want to continue conversations, like, just whatever tags we can put, because the information is no good if it's not shared.
Absolutely. And what I'm going to do is actually, I'll add all the resources and links to our online event page. I'll also send it out in a separate email to everyone that registered for today. So you guys will see whatever links, whatever slides, the email addresses as well. So yeah, I got y'all.
Thank you.
And do you guys have any closing remarks or ideas before I throw it over to Dennis?
Educators of color, I love us. I love us for what we do. No one will ever understand the sacrifice that we put on the line every day for our kids. I know there are other people who, Malcolm X says that no group would ever give their kids over to another group, to be educated. And what I think that Black and brown leaders and Black and brown teachers are the unsung heroes of our educational fight. And so I don't ever want us to miss the fact to just say thank you and to say I love you for what you do all across this country.
I couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, and I love you for what you do for us, and what you do for our children, ultimately what you do for our future.
I see one more question came in. I think I'm gonna have this gentleman stay on right after everyone gets off, to see if you all can kind of talk to him briefly about it. But now I am going to go ahead and introduce one of our State of Black Learning organizers, Dennis Henderson. He will be closing us out with some additional resources and upcoming opportunities for those of you who are taking part in our August series. So Dennis, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Karee. And I also want to just, I can't say enough how much I sat here and just observing and listening. And Salaam, Liz, Mike, I felt like a student, even though I've been in this field for over 20 years. 4 years ago, when we sat down and we started brainstorming the State of Black Learning Conference, couldn't even imagine the multitude of remarkable individuals that would come along and bless us. So again, I want to thank you, and I want to thank all the participants for tuning in today. And we do want you to join us every week throughout the month of August. Couple of resources and opportunities I want to share with you. With the support of the Grable Foundation, we did get funding to supply ongoing workshops throughout the year. So it won't stop at the end of August. We'll continue to have workshops year round. And along with that, we have another sponsor that is doing some phenomenal work, known as X in the Box. And as Salaam was talking and Liz was talking and Mike was talking, one thing they kept hitting on was the importance to take these silos away. And I'm gonna try to share my screen here. I know Rhea's like, what is he doing? We didn't talk about sharing a screen, but I'm gonna try to share this here with you guys. There's a platform here, and do you guys see my screen? Sweet. X in a Box. X in a Box is a dynamic platform and a powerful resource where we can take a lot of the concepts that was discussed today, and it's not so much that you're teaching a kid something, but you're liberating them to create. And it's a couple of things I want to point out on here. What they do is actually take content, and I'm not going to even call it content, best practices from people in remarkable careers. And they show the various careers and how these careers intersect all these different academic areas. But the one I want to point out right now, we have Disney that we work with, we have Pixar we work with, others coming up, but Array 101 is put together by Ava DuVernay. And she has a series here in which, as we were talking, one of the big things we were hitting on was who's telling our story. And Array 101 has put together this beautiful space of content in which we can have our students explore how we are portrayed in media and how our stories are being told. And actually, they have an opportunity to retell their own story. So this is just a resource I wanted to share that is from one of our sponsors. But again, we wouldn't co-sign this if we didn't see there was a value within this for our students and for our educators. This is all free, no cost. So you can check that out on xiab.org. So feel free to check that out, and we'll also have that shared. But again, I just truly want to say thank you all for tuning in today. I can't stress enough the value of what we're getting out of this and how humbled I am by the speakers that we have and the presenters that we've had today. So I just want to thank you all and look forward to seeing you all again next week.
All right, DJ Nate, take us out.
Hit it.